Congress doesn't provide inflation, the Fed does. And that's why I'm so big on putting monetary rules in place too. We've got to have both. We've got to have a fiscal rule on the spending side for Congress, and we've got to have a monetary rule so spending won't get excessive from the Fed either. Hello. Welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. Well, it's 2025. Can you believe it? We're in a new year. We got a lot to talk about. There's a lot to do in 2025. So let's jump right into it, okay? 2025 brings new opportunities and challenges with President Trump's return to office on January 20th, a reshaped Congress, and bold initiatives from state legislatures across the country. While President Trump's leadership style often introduces volatility, as I know when I was at the Office of Management and Budget, seemed like it could change one day to the next depending on what post he was making on social media and other things. The focus must remain on fostering economic freedom and prosperity through reduced government spending, lower taxes, targeted deregulation, and much more. In this episode of the Let People Prosper Show, I'm going to outline the top reforms we need at both federal and state levels, from universal school choice to eliminating property taxes, okay? We got to ensure that there's progress, even in the face of political uncertainty. Remember, you can watch this episode on YouTube or listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, even visit my website. And also don't forget to go to vanceginn.substack.com to get your Substack newsletter directly in your inbox with all this great information. So what I'm watching in 2025 is federal reforms addressing spending and taxes. Spending cuts must happen amid political instability. Trump's dynamic leadership may create volatility, but Congress must prioritize cutting wasteful spending. Federal spending remains unsustainable at nearly 25% of our economic output, putting long-term economic health at risk, including the $36 trillion in national debt, which will continue to soar if nothing is done about that. And this doesn't even include the unfunded liabilities from Social Security, Medicare, and others. So we've got some major problems that must be addressed if we're going to start to turn things around. The key goal here is that we've got to cut government spending, all right? It's not just going to be good to slow the growth rate, which I think that we should. We've also got to make sure that we cut government spending and then cap spending growth in the future to a maximum rate of population growth plus inflation, while addressing entitlement reforms, so-called entitlement reforms, to stabilize the deficits moving forward. But not only do you need to rein in government spending to deal with these major problems and provide pro-growth policies for the future, we've also got to make sure we have economic growth. Growth, less government spending, that's the way to get out of these budget problems. It's not by raising taxes. Speaking of raising taxes, we've got to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. I think that they should go about this as the first thing that they do in the new year. When they look at reconciliation, they're probably going to have two bites of the apple at reconciliation in 2025. I think the first one should be about tax cuts, because that would allow for more certainty throughout the year. If you don't do the tax cuts initially, then that's going to bring about more economic uncertainty within the economy and could potentially lead to less economic growth than otherwise. So I think that's going to be a big part of that. I mean, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 boosted the economy. I don't think we'd be in the economic situation we're in today, but not for that, meaning that we'd be in a much worse situation overall. Congress must act to make these tax cuts permanent and explore broader reforms, such as shifting towards consumption-based taxes. And what I mean by that is you can make the federal income tax more consumption-based by not taxing savings, not taxing corporations, taxing the final income that's out there. And I think that would allow for us to have a much more reasonable situation that's more pro-growth and allows for more economic opportunity for the future. This means that we've got to broaden the income tax base and lower the rates, hopefully to a flat rate. That would provide more opportunities as well. So I think that's going to be another big part of this. There's also going to be a way to tackle inflation in DC, okay? To combat inflation, the Federal Reserve, which is the creator of the inflation that we see. There's some discussion out there on X and other places where even some of my friends are talking about government spending is what creates inflation. That's just wrong, right? I mean, we don't live in a Keynesian world. We never have. Keynesian economics was debunked a long time ago, to where Keynes said that if you increase government spending, we could fill gaps. And of course, that would contribute to inflationary pressures in the short run. The problem is that disassociates the spending by government from the taxes that have to be collected out of the system. And so when you break up those two, it's clear that Congress does not create inflation. The place where inflation comes is when the Federal Reserve increases its balance sheet by an excessive amount, or really at all, but excessively, especially a excessive amount there. And so what the Fed does is they go out and buy the debt issued by Congress from the overspending. And when they do that, they increase their balance sheet, increase the money supply. That increases demand in the economy without any additional taxes that come out on the other side of the equation. And that is what drives inflation. Too much money chasing too few goods in the economy. It's not from Congress's spending, okay? That's what fuels it. Or one way that I put it, it gives it ammunition to the gun that the Fed has to pull the trigger. The trigger doesn't pull it on its own, okay? The guns don't shoot people shoot people, okay? The same thing is true here when we talk about inflation. Congress doesn't provide inflation, the Fed does. And that's why I'm so big on putting monetary rules in place too. We've got to have both. We've got to have a fiscal rule on the spending side for Congress, and we've got to have a monetary rule so spending won't get excessive from the Fed either. If you do both of those things, we'll be in a much better situation, unless we can get to the gold standard or some sort of another type of standard for the exchange rate system that we don't have with our current flexible exchange rate system that's based on a fiat, debt-backed debt-backed system for our currency. We're going to have fiscal and monetary rules. All right. We need less discretion by policymakers, not more. All right. The other big thing that we're looking at is that states are laboratories of competition. Universal school choice expansion is what we really need to see. States like Texas and Florida are leading the way with education savings accounts and school choice programs. Really, it's Florida and not Texas. All right. Sorry, I misspoke there, but it's Florida, Arizona, other places that are leading school choice programs, not Texas. The largest red state in the country has not been able to get any school choice done. There are more than 30 states that now have some form of school choice, and Texas is not one of them. That must change. Even Louisiana next door has provided a path to universal education savings accounts over the next few years. Texas must start to do this. So there was a lot of expansion of school choice in 2025, but I really think in 2024, in 2025, we got to start doing it right. We need universal education savings accounts in every state. That will really boost economic growth and prosperity for the future and allow for us to have better education outcomes and less poverty. The other big thing that I'm going to be watching is eliminating property taxes. Surplus revenues in Texas and other states provide a pathway to phase out burdensome property taxes. A surplus buy-down strategy and spending limits tied to population growth and inflation can ensure sustainability of those tax relief efforts. In particular, what I've said, whether it's the surplus buy-down method by limiting spending or swapping out sales taxes with property tax and broadening the sales tax base and things of that nature, the key thing is going to be limiting spending or even cutting government spending, okay? Cutting spending is government spending is the ultimate burden on us. And we've got to do something about that. And so I think we don't need property taxes anywhere. States should be looking at ways to ending the school maintenance and operation property tax. And then all the other property taxes, something should be done by the local governments. And I think that starts by limiting spending. We need strong constitutional spending limits for the state and local levels with a maximum rate of growth of population plus inflation. It's not a target. It's a maximum. Really, we'd like to see it be even less than that because that's how we're going to get more economic growth. And finally, we need pro-growth tax reforms, and which it comes with less spending as well. Kansas, Louisiana have steps in the right direction, even in South Carolina, North Carolina. But there's more that needs to be done, and that's really done by also removing excessive regulations, so we have more economic growth for the future. The other thing here is going to be managing volatility while embracing opportunity. We know that President Trump is unpredictable in many ways. He can create short-term volatility in markets and policy implementation, depending on what he's going to say and how he's going to react to the media and everything else. However, focusing on the administration's pro-growth agenda that includes spending cuts and restraint, deregulation, extending the Trump tax cuts and making them permanent. Those are the types of things that we'll see much more in economic growth. So we've got to build on the 24 successes that we've seen of deregulatory efforts, universal school choice, tax reforms at the state level, and provide a foundation to build on in 2025. States can demonstrate resilience and innovation even amid federal uncertainty. That also includes local governments and the federal government as well. So we need economic freedom. Navigating political turbulence requires a steadfast commitment to free market principles that are the best path that are the best path to prosperity, right? Those free market capitalism. Reducing government interference and empowering individuals can create a more stable and prosperous economy for all Americans. There's got to be a way to do this. You got to make sure that there's spending restraints, school choice, tax reforms, deregulation. This is how we're going to be able to provide a more sustainable, a more prosperous future for the future, and sustainable budgets as well. If we could do those things, 2025 is going to be amazing. It's going to bring in share volatility. Don't get me wrong, but it presents a chance to achieve significant reforms that advance economic freedom and prosperity by focusing on sustainable fiscal policies, expanding school choice, and empowering states to lead as laboratories of competition. We can chart a path toward growth and opportunity. I appreciate you listening each and every week. I hope you will go out and share it with your friends and families and leave me a 5-star rating. Don't forget, you can get all this information at vanceginn.com and much more than that, actually. Oh, and you can also go to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. Subscribe. You can be a paid subscriber. That would help me out a lot as well here in 2025. We've got a lot to do, whether it be in Texas or other places, because we got to fight back from big government. Big government is getting in the way of our lives and our prosperity and everything else. And this is the time to overcome those challenges. So I appreciate you listening and sharing and sticking with me here in 2025 and much more after that. So God bless you and let people prosper.